superhero murder sprees, portals to who knows where, and sentient viruses. If you want your jaw to drop when the credits roll, catch these scary flicks. For obvious reasons, morgues are horrifying enough at the best of times. When you're performing an autopsy on a body that you soon suspect may be a witch, however, they become that much worse. Despite stellar performances from Emile Hirsch and Brian Cox, the 2016 horror The Autopsy of Jane Doe flew under the radar of many, but it's as effective a chiller now as it was back then. The idea that an antagonist might still be alive at the conclusion of a horror movie is nothing new, but the intriguing central premise and unfolding mystery behind the titular corpse makes it a real shame we never got a follow-up to this one. Horror franchises have gone on to thrive on far weaker premises after all. At the end of The Thing, McCready suggests that he and Child stay put and see what happens, as the synthesized heartbeat of John Carpenter's soundtrack kicks in, leaving us none the wiser as to the ultimate fate of the two survivors of Outpost 31. The titular amorphous extraterrestrial has possibly been defeated in the destruction of said base, but neither of the two survivors know if the other is infected. Fans have engaged in endless speculation about the ending of The Thing over the years, with theories abound regarding the glints in characters' eyes, or even the visibility of their breath. The Thing would ultimately get a sequel of sorts in a Dark Horse comic series in 1991, which continued the film's storyline. It is arguable, however, whether this is part of the true canon or not. One proposed alternate ending would have removed nearly all the ambiguity from the movie, but thankfully audiences were left with the perfect open-ended conclusion, one that hammers home the central themes of the movie, of paranoia and the terror of the unknown. There's a lot to be said for the original ending of the third installment in the Evil Dead franchise, Army of Darkness, in which Ash accidentally swallows too many droplets of sleeping potion and ends up in a post-apocalyptic future. But it's the ending of the second film, Dead by Dawn, that truly stands out among the rest. Effectively a bigger budget version of the original with more black humor, the climax of the sequel sees an incantation from the Necronomicon open a vortex which pulls in the movie's troublesome demon. Unfortunately, it also pulls in hapless hero Ash and his 1973 Oldsmobile, dumping them both unceremoniously back in the Middle Ages. Oblivious to the fact that ammo won't be available for more than 500 years, Ash saves some knights from a winged deadite with a blast of his shotgun. Hailed as a hero, an anguished Ash realizes he's trapped in the past.
Hail he who has come from the skies to deliver us from the terrors of the deadites!
As far as dynamic shifting endings go, this one is pretty astonishing. The Void is a Canadian H.P. Lovecraft-inspired trip into darkness, following a group of disparate characters trapped inside a hospital by bizarre cultists. Spoiler alert, it may or may not be a gateway to hell. An indie horror film notable for its gore and some outstanding practical effects. This is essentially a nihilistic siege movie with a great deal of ambiguity. At the end of the movie, Sheriff Daniel Carter and his estranged nurse wife Allison find themselves having passed into the titular Void, standing on an alien landscape beneath an otherworldly black pyramid. It's an ending reminiscent of the conclusion of Lucio Fulci's 1981 Spanish horror, The Beyond, which also sees its two leads stranded in a nightmarish world. Sadly, both movies abruptly end there. The explorations of these couples would not go beyond their films, leaving the secrets of both eternally untold. Opinions are wildly divided on the concluding act of 10 Cloverfield Lane, which begins as a taut hostage thriller, but ends as something quite different, as though Rod Serling from The Twilight Zone were let loose on an Alfred Hitchcock screenplay. The name alone should have been an indicator enough that it tied into the Cloverfield universe, but a few critics complained about the whiplash of a drama about a kidnapped girl suddenly turning into an alien invasion movie. Having escaped from the underground bunker in which she has been kept prisoner, Michelle conquers some of the pesky aliens lingering on the surface and decides to join the human resistance. Sadly, this intriguing storyline would never be continued. The much maligned The Cloverfield Paradox, released 2 years later, feels completely unrelated to this one, and comes off as even more shoehorned into the greater franchise. Comic books have often contemplated what might happen if there was an evil variant of Superman, or even if something could turn the Man of Steel to the dark side. The 2019 superhero horror flick Brightburn, however, presented audiences with a particularly promising premise. What if Superman was just born evil? At the end of the movie, the superpowered child, Brandon Breyer, has killed both of his parents and downed a commercial airliner to cover his tracks. As the strains of Billie Eilish's Bad Guy plays over the end credits, Brandon continues his murderous spree, toying with mankind as though they were insects. The foundations of a sequel with the world fighting against a superpowered child are fascinating enough, but the film introduces an Alex Jones-esque shock jock who hints that Brightburn is merely one of several superhumans who exist. One of the others is shown as Rainn Wilson's Crimson Bolt from the hyper-violent superhero movie Super, which would be an intriguing crossover indeed.
Shut up, crime. Here's the Crimson Bolt.
Whereas 28 Days Later ended on an optimistic note, with the protagonist rescued from the clutches of the movie's zombie-like creatures, the sequel, 28 Weeks Later, posits a far grimmer future. The closing shots of the movie show that the rage virus, which changes ordinary people into rabid feral monsters, has spread like wildfire, threatening the entirety of mainland Europe. The audience has no idea about the fate of the survivors, whose plight they've been watching, only getting glimpses of their downed and abandoned helicopter. Although not as critically or as financially successful as its predecessor, relatively healthy box office returns for the film indicated a likely sequel. However, far more than 28 months have passed since the 2007 release. Characters surviving in the ensuing rage-filled world would have excellent dramatic potential, of course, but it could well be that this franchise is very much dead and buried. Halloween 3: Season of the Witch attempted to do something different with the Halloween formula, striving to theme the series more around the season than the murderous mute Michael Myers. Despite being one of the best movies of the series, however, audiences just didn't take to it. The fourth film therefore needed to announce the return of the Shape, and demonstrate that it was service as usual in the beleaguered town of Haddonfield. That said, the return of Michael Myers did attempt to break the formula in its own way. Myers is executed by a hail of gunfire at the end of the film, but it turns out that his evil has somehow passed on to Jamie, his niece. In a scene reminiscent of the opening of the first classic movie, Jamie is dressed like a clown. It briefly looks like we have a new Shape, threatening to take the series in a bold direction. Any potential is squandered by the fifth movie though, which barely followed up on the previous film's cliffhanger, except for some weak plotting about psychic links. In The Birds, socialite Melanie travels to the small, sleepy coastal town of Bodega Bay, California, utterly unprepared for all the birds in the area to begin to randomly attack the populace. Perhaps finally bored of being caged, roasted, and having their unborn children poached, scrambled, or fried, these birds have finally had enough of mankind. It's never revealed why these feathered creatures have suddenly turned on the humans. So maybe it's no surprise that Alfred Hitchcock's movie ends without any real resolution. As you'd expect from the master of suspense, it's essentially an open ending. You never truly learn of the extent to which the phenomenon is occurring elsewhere, or whether it's just confined to Bodega Bay, or whether the leads can ever escape the nightmare at all. A poor made-for-TV sequel did eventually appear 31 years after the original, titled The Birds 2: Land's End, but even the director tried to remove himself from the credits of that particular disaster.
You like Huey Lewis in the news?
Like the Bret Easton Ellis book on which it is based, American Psycho ends abruptly, with an ambiguous conclusion. Many of the chapters of the book actually end mid-sentence, and the film itself plays with this idea at times. Were the murders all in the mind of sociopathic stockbroker Patrick Bateman? Is somebody playing tricks on him? Or is there a combination of both truth and reality hidden by Bateman's crumbling mental faculties? Patrick may have gone on to appear in other novels by Ellis, but the deliberately vague ending of American Psycho would only lead to one more movie appearance, as part of a dreadful spin-off that wasn't even intended to be a sequel, a movie only renamed and released later down the line as a lame cash-in. In a perfect world, there's an excellent follow-up to American Psycho that casts more illumination on the intriguing conclusion of the Mary Harron 80s satire. But American Psycho 2, All-American Girl, ain't it? The strength of the Blair Witch Project is found in its ambiguity and the sense of mystery that pervades every frame. Threats are briefly glanced at or only heard, and the movie succeeds in building up an oppressive sense of atmosphere based on a disturbing yet subtle mythology. The movie follows 3 film students and their exploits in Maryland to document a fabled witch who once lived in the area, and her connections to a serial killer from the 1940s. Eventually, lost and missing one of their numbers, they stumble across the serial killer's old abode. It's in this ramshackle hovel that they both learn that the legends are more than myth, and the threat of the Blair Witch still lives on. It's an effective and chilling conclusion, one that provides just enough hook to warrant a sequel. Unfortunately, the resultant follow-up, Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2, was as conventional as the first movie was bold, and as mediocre as the first film was excellent. Part of a renaissance age of horror that took place in the 2010s, It Follows introduced moviegoers to a new type of terror. The monster in this movie is basically a sentient, sexually transmitted infection that hunts down and brutally murders its victims, with impending doom only held at bay by passing it on to someone else.
If it kills her, it gets me and goes straight down the line to whoever started it.
Think Ringu, but with more teenage groping and fumbling. Slasher movies had warned teenagers about having sex back in the 80s, and now it had come full circle. By the end of the movie, a desperate attempt to finally put a stop to this evil entity has met with undetermined results. As with the best of horrors, the climax is left open to interpretation. Both protagonists, Jay and Paul, have had sex with each other, but viewers have no idea whether the deadly entity is still a threat or not. The final shot sees the two of them walking down the street, a figure walking behind them. Is it the entity or just a pedestrian? The ambiguity here works well, as the entity is effectively death, and death is both unstoppable and remorseless. There was once talk of a sequel that would flip the concept on its head, and have its characters research the origins of this entity, but it doesn't seem to have come to pass.